The coach rejected the basketball player. Unknown to her, he was her childhood lover who. Her fingers tore through his application like it meant nothing, the white papers scattering at his feet like broken promises, while the name Tommy written in his careful handwriting lay crumpled between them. A name she'd once whispered in the summer twilight 20 years ago. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The gymnasium at Richmond High School in Virginia smelled of polished hardwood and decades of teenage dreams. Coach Jasmine Washington stood at center court, her red Nike tracksuit a bold statement against the muted colors of the aging facility. At 28, she commanded respect with every step, her skin glistening under the fluorescent lights, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail that swayed as she moved with the precision of someone who'd fought for every opportunity. Next. Her voice echoed through the gym, cutting through the nervous chatter of hopeful players waiting their turn for tryouts. Jasmine had built Richmond High's basketball program from nothing. 3 years ago, she'd inherited a team that couldn't win a game if their lives depended on it. Now, they were district champions, and college scouts were regular fixtures in these bleachers. She didn't get here by being soft or sentimental. She got here by being ruthless in her standards and unwavering in her vision. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the court where 17 hopefuls had already been dismissed. Some left angry, others dejected, but all left knowing they weren't good enough for Coach Washington's standards. She kept a mental tally, 3 maybes, 2 definite numbers, and 1 possibility for junior varsity. I said next. Jasmine's voice carried the kind of authority that made grown men step aside on sidewalks. From the corner of her eye, she noticed someone approaching, tall, athletic, wearing a faded yellow jersey that had seen better days. There was something about his stride, confident yet hesitant, that made her look up from her clipboard. Tommy Mitchell stopped 3 feet from her, his application clutched in hands that trembled slightly. At 29, he still carried the lean build of a natural athlete, though the years had carved lines around his blue eyes and threaded silver through his sandy brown hair. His jersey hung loose on his frame, and his sneakers, while clean, showed the wear of someone who'd been playing street ball for money rather than glory. I'm here for the tryout, he said, his voice carrying a soft Virginia drawl that seemed to catch in his throat. Jasmine didn't look up from her clipboard. Tryouts ended an hour ago. You're late. I know, but I was hoping. No. The word came out like a slap. I don't do hoping. I do punctuality, commitment, and excellence. None of which you've demonstrated by showing up late to the most important hour of tryouts. Tommy shifted his weight, his fingers tightening around the application. Coach, if you'd just look at my paperwork, I think you'd see. I don't need to see anything. Jasmine finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting his blue ones for the first time. For a split second, something flickered across her face, a shadow of recognition that was gone before it could take root. How old are you? 29. A harsh laugh escaped her lips. 29. This is high school basketball, not a midlife crisis rehabilitation center. We're building a program for kids who have futures ahead of them, not has-beens trying to relive their glory days. The words hit Tommy like physical blows. He'd expected rejection. It wasn't the first time, but something about the coldness in her voice, the complete dismissal, cut deeper than usual. I'm not trying to relive anything. I'm trying to help. I can assist with training, work with the younger players. I've got experience. Experience? Jasmine's eyebrows shot up. Let me guess. You were probably all-state in high school, right? Maybe had a scholarship to some Division II school that didn't work out. Now you're thinking you can coach because you can still hit a few shots at the local rec center. Each word was calculated to wound, and Tommy felt them all hit their mark. But it was the way she said it, with such intimate knowledge of failure, that made him realize she'd given this speech before. To other dreamers, other men who'd shown up too late to the party. Save it. Jasmine held out her hand. Give me the application. Hope flickered in Tommy's chest as he handed over the carefully filled out forms. Maybe she was reconsidering. Maybe. The sound of tearing paper filled the gym. Jasmine ripped his application in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the polished floor like confetti from a celebration he wasn't invited to. There. Now you don't have to waste any more time on impossible dreams. Tommy stared at the pieces of paper scattered around his worn sneakers. Among the debris, he could see fragments of his name, Thomas Mitchell, and pieces of the personal essay he'd spent hours writing about his love for the game, about wanting to give back to the community that had raised him. I grew up here, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. In Richmond. I know these kids, know these streets. I know what it means to have someone believe in you when everyone else has given up. Something in his tone made Jasmine pause in her dismissal. There was pain there, old and deep, the kind that comes from being the one everyone gives up on. But she'd heard sob stories before, and she'd learned that letting emotion cloud judgment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Everyone's got a story, she said, turning away. Doesn't make them qualified to be part of mine. Tommy stood there for a long moment, looking at the woman who'd just demolished his hopes with the efficiency of a machine. There was something familiar about the way she held herself, something in the tilt of her chin that tugged at memories he kept locked away. But it was impossible. The girl he'd known, the girl he'd loved, would never have been this cruel. Coach Washington, he said, testing the name on his tongue. She turned back, impatience written across her features. What? Nothing. Thank you for your time. As Tommy bent to collect the pieces of his application, Jasmine watched him with an expression she couldn't quite name. There was something about the curve of his shoulders, the way his hair fell across his forehead as he knelt, that whispered of summer evenings and childhood laughter. But the whisper was too faint to trust, too dangerous to acknowledge. Security will escort you out if you're not gone in 60 seconds, she called after him as he walked toward the exit. Tommy paused at the gym doors, his hand on the metal handle that was warm from the afternoon sun. For a moment, he considered turning around, considered saying the name that had lived in his heart for 20 years. But the woman in the red tracksuit bore no resemblance to the girl who used to climb the old oak tree behind the church, the girl who'd promised they'd find each other again someday. The doors closed behind him with a hollow clang that echoed through the empty gymnasium. Jasmine stood alone on the court, surrounded by the remnants of dreams she'd crushed, and tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking. She told herself it was anger at having her time wasted, at the presumption of some washed-up wannabe thinking he could just waltz into her program. But deep down, in a place she'd learned to keep locked tight, something was stirring. Something that felt dangerously like recognition. What do you think drove Coach Washington to be so harsh in her rejection? Have you ever had to make tough decisions that went against your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The parking lot of Richmond High was nearly empty by the time Tommy reached his beat-up Honda Civic. The car had seen better decades, rust ate at the wheel wells like cancer, and the passenger door required a specific combination of pulling and cursing to open properly. But it was his, bought with money earned from weekend basketball games at Riverside Park where men twice his age still believed they could reclaim their youth for $20 a game. Tommy sat behind the wheel for a long moment, not starting the engine. His hands still trembled slightly from the encounter, though whether from anger, humiliation, or something else entirely, he couldn't say. The torn pieces of his application sat crumpled in his lap like the remnants of a love letter returned to sender. Through the windshield, he could see the back of the school building where a few windows still glowed with late afternoon light. Somewhere in there, Coach Washington was probably already forgetting he existed, moving on to whatever came next in her carefully ordered life. But Tommy couldn't move on. Not yet. He pulled out his phone, a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen protector, and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Marcus Williams answered on the second ring. Tommy. Man, how'd the tryout go? Marcus had been Tommy's best friend since middle school, back when they'd both believed they were destined for the NBA. Now Marcus managed a sporting goods store in downtown Richmond and had a mortgage, a wife named Patricia, and twin daughters who called Tommy Uncle Tommy, even though they weren't related by blood. About as well as expected, Tommy said, his voice flat. Ah, shit. She didn't even let you try out. Worse. She ripped up my application right in front of me. There was silence on the other end of the line. Marcus knew about Tommy's struggles, the knee injury that ended his college career at VCU, the years of drifting from job to job, the way basketball remained the only constant in a life that had gone sideways somewhere around his 22nd birthday. Maybe it's time to let it go, T, Marcus said gently. There's other ways to be involved. Youth leagues, community centers. This was different, Tommy interrupted. This was. I don't know how to explain it. Try me. Tommy closed his eyes, seeing again the woman in the red tracksuit, the way she'd held herself like she was ready for war. The coach. There was something about her. Something familiar. Familiar how? Before Tommy could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from his landlord. Rent was due yesterday. Late fee applies after 6 p.m. today. I gotta go, Marcus. Thanks for listening. Tommy, wait. But Tommy had already hung up. He started the Honda, which coughed twice before turning over, and pulled out of the school parking lot. As he drove through the familiar streets of Richmond, past the corner store where he'd bought candy as a kid and the church where his grandmother had dragged him every Sunday until she passed, he found his thoughts drifting back 20 years. Summer 1985. Tommy was 9 years old, all knees and elbows and a shock of sandy hair that his mother couldn't keep combed. He'd been living with his grandmother for 3 months, ever since his parents decided that raising a kid was interfering with their pursuit of various chemical escapes from reality. The Riverside Community Center ran a summer program for kids whose parents worked, or in Tommy's case, kids whose parents weren't around to care. It was there, on a basketball court with more cracks than smooth pavement, that he first saw her. She was 8 years old, all fierce eyes and cornrowed hair, wearing a yellow sundress that was too small and sneakers that were too big. While the other kids played on the jungle gym or splashed in the kiddie pool, she stood at the edge of the basketball court watching the older boys play. You want to shoot? Tommy had asked, bouncing a worn basketball that belonged to the center. She looked at him with suspicion. Boys don't let girls play. I'm not boys, Tommy said. I'm Tommy. I'm Jazz, she said. And when she smiled, Tommy felt something shift in his chest, something warm and bright that he'd later learn was the beginning of love. They spent that summer teaching each other. Tommy showed Jazz how to shoot, how to dribble between her legs, how to read the court like a story unfolding. Jazz taught Tommy about dreams, about believing in impossible things, about how sometimes the person who loves you most is the one willing to push you hardest. I'm gonna be a coach someday, she told him one evening as they sat on the swings, sharing a bag of chips Tommy had bought with quarters found in his grandmother's couch cushions. Girls can't be coaches, Tommy said, not to be mean but because it was 1985 and that's what he'd been told. Jazz's dark eyes flashed with determination. Watch me. The memory hit Tommy so hard he had to pull over. He sat in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, his heart pounding, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Jazz. Little Jazz Williams from the community center, who'd moved away the summer before 5th grade when her mother got a job in Atlanta. Jazz, who'd written him letters for 2 years before they faded into the natural amnesia of childhood. Jazz, who'd promised they'd find each other again when they were grown-ups. Jasmine Washington. The pieces clicked together with the brutal clarity of a puzzle finally solved. The familiar tilt of her chin, the way she moved with unconscious grace, the intimate knowledge of disappointment in her voice when she'd catalogued his failures, she'd lived them too, in her own way. Tommy pulled out his phone and did something he probably should have done years ago. He Googled Jasmine Washington Richmond High basketball. The search results filled his cracked screen. Photos of her accepting coaching awards, newspaper articles about her innovative training methods, a feature story in the Richmond Times-Dispatch with the headline, From Community Center Courts to Championship Glory, Coach Washington's Inspiring Journey. Tommy's hands shook as he read. Born Jasmine Williams in Richmond, Virginia. Moved to Atlanta at age 9. Full scholarship to Georgia Tech professional career in the WNBA that ended after 3 seasons due to a career-ending ankle injury. Graduate degree in sports management. Returned to Richmond 2 years ago to give back to the community that shaped her. There was a photo accompanying the article, Jasmine in her coaching clothes, holding a championship trophy, surrounded by her team. But it was the smaller photo, a throwback image from her playing days, that made Tommy's breath catch. Even at 18, he could see traces of the little girl who'd taught him that dreams were worth fighting for. The girl who'd broken his heart by disappearing. The woman who'd just broken it all over again. Tommy sat in that parking lot as the sun set over Richmond, Virginia, and felt 20 years of carefully constructed walls crumble around him. He'd spent 2 decades wondering what had happened to Jazz Williams, creating elaborate fantasies about their reunion, imagining the moment when they'd see each other again and laugh about how silly they'd been as kids. He'd never imagined she wouldn't recognize him. He'd never imagined she'd become someone who could look right through him like he was nothing. The Honda's radio crackled to life, playing an old R&B song that had been popular during their last summer together. Tommy turned it off with more force than necessary, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. His phone buzzed again. Another text from his landlord, this one with more urgency and less politeness. Tommy ignored it and started the car. He had $47 in his checking account, a job interview tomorrow morning at a warehouse that paid $12 an hour, and a heart that felt like it had been put through a paper shredder. But for the first time in years, Tommy Mitchell knew exactly where he needed to be. He drove back to Richmond High School. The parking lot was empty now except for a single car, a sleek black BMW that looked like it cost more than Tommy made in a year. Through the gym windows, he could see lights still on, could make out the silhouette of someone moving around the court. Tommy parked next to the BMW and walked to the gym doors. They were locked, but there was a side entrance that led to the locker rooms. In high school, he'd learned that the maintenance staff often left that door unlocked during evening hours for coaches who stayed late. Some things never changed. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and teenage dreams deferred. Tommy's footsteps echoed off the cinder-block walls as he made his way toward the gymnasium, following the sound of a basketball bouncing in steady rhythm. He paused at the entrance to the gym, staying in the shadows where she couldn't see him. Jasmine was alone on the court, still wearing her red tracksuit, working through what looked like a complex passing drill with 5 basketballs and a series of cones. Her movements were fluid, precise, economical, no energy wasted, every motion serving a purpose. She'd set up cameras at different angles, presumably to film herself for later analysis. This was how she'd always been, even as a kid. Obsessive about improvement, relentless in her pursuit of perfection. While other children played for fun, Jazz had played like her life depended on it. Tommy watched her work, mesmerized by the familiar rhythm of her movements. She'd grown into the woman she'd always been destined to become, strong, focused, uncompromising. The little girl who'd declared she would be a coach had kept her promise. But somewhere along the way, she'd also become someone who could destroy dreams without blinking. As if sensing his presence, Jasmine stopped mid-drill and turned toward the doorway. Her eyes found his in the dim light, and for a moment, time seemed suspended between them. "I told you to leave," she said, her voice carrying across the empty gym like a challenge. Tommy stepped into the light. "Hello, Jazz." The basketball fell from her hands, bouncing twice before rolling to a stop against the far wall. The silence that followed was profound, weighted with 20 years of unasked questions and unspoken truths. Jasmine's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, something that might have been pain. "No," she whispered. "Yeah," Tommy said quietly. "It's me." Have you ever had someone from your past resurface when you least expected it? How do you think Jasmine is feeling right now? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The word hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that had never quite been extinguished. Jazz. A name that belonged to summer afternoons and scraped knees and promises made by children who believed the world would never change. Jasmine took a step backward, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. "You can't be here. You need to leave. Now." But Tommy didn't move. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway fluorescence, looking like a ghost she'd spent 20 years trying not to think about. The years had changed him, carved lines around his eyes, broadened his shoulders, threaded silver through hair that had once been the color of summer wheat. But his smile, when it flickered across his face, was exactly the same. "You look good, Jazz," he said quietly. "Really good. You became everything you said you would." "Don't." The word came out sharp, defensive. "Don't you dare stand there and act like you know me." "I do know you." Tommy took a step into the gym, his hands loose at his sides, non-threatening. "I know you practice alone because you push yourself harder than you'd ever push anyone else. I know you set up those cameras because you analyze your own performance more critically than any critic ever could. I know you're wearing that red tracksuit because red was always your power color. You said it made you feel like you could take on the world." Each observation hit its mark, and Jasmine felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Stop it. I know you're angry at me," Tommy continued, his voice growing softer with each word. "And you have every right to be." "Angry?" Jasmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I'm angry? You think I've spent 20 years being angry at some boy I knew for one summer? Haven't you?" The question landed like a physical blow. Jasmine felt her composure slip, felt 20 years of carefully buried emotion threatening to surface. She bent to retrieve the basketball that had rolled away, using the motion to buy herself time to think, to breathe, to remember who she was now. When she straightened, her mask was back in place. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it's not a game. Tommy's voice cut through her words with quiet intensity. I've been looking for you for 20 years. Looking for me? Jasmine's eyebrows shot up. Looking for me? Do you have any idea how easy I am to find? I've been in the newspaper. I've won awards. I've been giving interviews about my inspiring journey from community center courts to championship glory. She air quoted the last part with bitter precision. If you'd wanted to find me, you could have Googled me. I tried, Tommy said simply. I tried for years. But I was looking for Jazz Williams, not Jasmine Washington. The explanation stopped Jasmine cold. Of course. She'd taken her stepfather's name when her mother remarried during her senior year of high school. Robert Washington had been a good man, patient and kind, everything her biological father hadn't been. Taking his name had felt like claiming a new identity, leaving behind the girl who'd been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love her, including Tommy. You left, she said, and 20 years of hurt compressed into those 2 words. You promised you'd write, and you just left. Tommy's face crumpled. Jasmine, she corrected sharply. My name is Jasmine. Jasmine. He said it carefully, like he was learning a new language. I did write. I wrote you dozens of letters. I sent them to the address you gave me in Atlanta. I never got any letters. I know. I figured that out when mine started coming back marked return to sender. I tried calling information, but your mom had an unlisted number. I even convinced my grandmother to drive me to Atlanta one weekend when I was 16. We went to the address you'd given me, but it was a vacant lot. Had been for years, according to the neighbors. Jasmine felt the floor shift beneath her feet. That's impossible. We lived on Peachtree Street. Peachtree Court, Tommy said gently. You lived on Peachtree Court. I went to Peachtree Street. Spent 3 hours knocking on doors, asking if anyone knew a girl named Jazz Williams who loved basketball and had the prettiest smile in Georgia. The detail hit her like a punch to the gut. Peachtree Court. Of course. She'd been 8 years old, scared and homesick, trying to remember an address her mother had made her memorize in case she got lost. She'd mixed up the street and the court, giving Tommy an address that didn't exist. I waited, she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her chest. I waited for letters that never came. I thought you'd forgotten about me. I thought I didn't matter to you. You mattered, Tommy said, his voice rough with emotion. God, Jasmine, you mattered more than anything. You were the first person who ever believed I could be somebody. The first person who made me feel like I was worth believing in. Then why didn't you try harder? The question exploded out of her with 20 years of pent-up fury behind it. Why didn't you find another way? Why didn't you? Because I was 9 years old. Tommy's own composure finally cracked. I was 9 years old, living with my grandmother because my parents were too high to remember they had a kid. I wrote those letters with pencils stolen from school because we couldn't afford supplies. I rode my bike to the post office every week with quarters I found in couch cushions to buy stamps. I did try, Jasmine. I tried until it broke something inside me. The rawness in his voice stopped her cold. She'd spent so many years imagining him as the villain of her childhood story, the boy who'd promised forever and delivered abandonment. She'd never considered that he might have his own version of heartbreak, his own story of promises broken by circumstances beyond his control. My grandmother died when I was 12, Tommy continued, his voice quieter now. I went into foster care after that. Bounced around between families who saw me as a paycheck instead of a person. Basketball was the only thing that kept me sane, and every time I stepped on a court, I thought about you. About the girl who taught me that dreams were worth fighting for. Jasmine felt tears threatening and pushed them back with force of will. She couldn't afford to be vulnerable now. Vulnerability was a luxury for people who didn't have 17-year-olds depending on them to be strong. That's a very touching story, she said, her voice deliberately cold. But it doesn't change anything. You're still 29 years old trying to play high school basketball. You're still. I'm not trying to play, Tommy interrupted. I'm trying to help. I coach at the Riverside Community Center on weekends. Kids from the same neighborhood where we met. Kids who look at basketball the same way we did, like it's their ticket out of whatever hell they are living in. Then why are you here? Why aren't you helping them instead of wasting my time? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was memorizing it. Because they need more than weekend coaching. They need someone who understands what it means to want something so badly it hurts. They need someone who knows what it's like to have doors slammed in their face because of where they come from or how much money their parents don't have. And you think that someone is you? I think that someone could be us. The word hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Us. As if 20 years hadn't passed. As if they were still two kids sharing dreams on a broken basketball court. There is no us, Jasmine said firmly. There's me, and there's my program, and there's 17 kids who are counting on me to prepare them for life after high school. I don't have time for nostalgia or second chances or whatever this is. What if I could help them get scholarships? The question stopped Jasmine mid-thought. What? The kids at Riverside. 3 of them are good enough for college ball, but they don't have the exposure. No scouts are looking at community center courts in Richmond. But if they were training with your program, working with your players. Tommy let the implication hang in the air. You're trying to manipulate me. I'm trying to help kids who deserve better than what they are getting. By using our history to guilt me into. By using whatever works, Tommy said with quiet intensity. These kids don't care about our history. They care about their futures. And right now, their futures look a lot like our pasts, all potential and no opportunity. Jasmine felt the conversation slipping away from her, spinning into territory she couldn't control. Control was everything. Control was what separated successful coaches from well-meaning failures. Control was what kept her heart from breaking every time she had to choose between sentiment and success. I want you to leave, she said, turning away from him. I want you to walk out that door and never come back. I can't do that. Why not? She spun around, her composure finally cracking completely. Why can't you just leave me alone? I built something here. I built something good and clean and mine. I don't need you showing up and reminding me of what? Of how it felt to lose you. The words ripped out of her with such force that they echoed through the empty gymnasium. Of how it felt to be 8 years old and check the mailbox every single day for 6 months, hoping for a letter that never came. Of how it felt to realize that even the people who promise to love you will leave you behind the first chance they get. Tommy took a step toward her, his hand extended. Jazz, don't touch me. She backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. Don't you dare touch me. You lost that right 20 years ago. I never wanted to lose that right. I never wanted to lose you. But you did. The words came out broken, raw. You lost me, and I had to figure out how to live without you. I had to figure out how to trust people again, how to love people again, how to build something that couldn't be taken away by a forwarding address mix-up or a family crisis or any of the 1,000 things that can destroy a little girl's heart. Tommy's own eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry. God, Jasmine, I'm so sorry. If I could go back. You can't. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, angry at herself for showing weakness. You can't go back, and you can't fix this, and you can't just show up here and expect me to be that little girl who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. I don't expect that. Then what do you expect? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, looking around the gymnasium that represented everything she'd built without him. I expect you to be exactly who you are. Strong, brilliant, uncompromising. The woman who took a losing program and turned it into something champions are made of. He met her eyes. I just hoped maybe there might be room in that woman's life for someone who never stopped believing in her. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Jasmine felt her walls crumble a little more, felt the careful distance she'd maintained between herself and the world narrow to nothing. It's too late, she whispered. Maybe, Tommy agreed. But what if it's not? Before she could answer, the gymnasium doors burst open and 3 of her players came jogging in, laughing about something that had happened at dinner. They stopped short when they saw Tommy, their expressions shifting from casual amusement to protective alertness. Coach Damon Peterson, her star point guard, stepped forward. Everything okay? Jasmine looked between Tommy and her players, feeling the weight of 20 years pressing down on her shoulders. These kids trusted her. They'd followed her into battle after battle, championship after championship. They deserved a coach who was focused, present, unshakable. Not someone who could be undone by a ghost from the past. Everything's fine, she said, her voice steadying as she slipped back into her coaching persona. Mr. Mitchell was just leaving. Tommy's face showed no surprise at the dismissal, only a kind of sad acceptance that suggested he'd been expecting it all along. Yes, he said quietly. I was just leaving. He walked toward the exit, pausing when he reached the spot where she'd torn up his application hours earlier. The pieces were gone now, swept up by the custodial staff, but they both remembered what had happened there. For what it's worth, Tommy said without turning around, I never stopped looking for you. Not really. Every woman I met, every relationship I tried to build, I was always comparing them to an 8-year-old girl who taught me what it meant to dream big. He was almost to the door when Jasmine's voice stopped him. Tommy. He turned, hope flickering in his blue eyes. The kids at Riverside, she said carefully. How good are they really? What do you think Jasmine should do? Should she give Tommy a chance to prove himself, or protect the program she's built? Share your thoughts about second chances in the comments below. Tommy stopped in the doorway, his hand frozen on the metal handle. The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. They are good, he said, turning back to face her. Really good. But more than that, they are hungry. They want it the way we used to want it. Damon and the other two players, Marcus Thompson, a 6'6" forward with NBA dreams, and Kevin Barnes, a scrappy shooting guard who reminded Jasmine of herself at that age, exchanged glances. They'd never seen their coach look uncertain about anything. How good? Jasmine pressed, her coaching instincts overriding her emotional turmoil. DeMarco Johnson has a vertical leap that would make college scouts weep, Tommy said, moving back into the gym. 17 years old, 6'4", handles the ball like he was born with it attached to his palm. But he's been in trouble with the law twice, so no high school coach will touch him. Trouble how? Shoplifting food for his little sister when his mom was too high to remember they existed. Fighting a dealer who was trying to recruit his 12-year-old brother. The kind of trouble that happens when good kids are trying to survive bad situations. Jasmine felt something twist in her chest. She'd heard variations of this story 100 times. Kids with talent and heart who got written off because their circumstances didn't fit neat categories. There's also Malik Washington, Tommy continued, encouraged by her attention. Point guard, 5'9", reads the court like he's got ESPN highlights playing in his head. Lost his dad in Afghanistan when he was 10. Lives with his grandmother who works 3 jobs to keep the lights on. Washington. Damon stepped forward, interest sparking in his dark eyes. Any relation to Coach? Different Washington, Jasmine said quickly, though she made a mental note to ask Tommy about it later. Who's the third one? Jamal Rivers. 6'8", moves like water, shoots like he was taught by angels. But he's been out of school for 6 months. Why? Tommy's expression darkened. His mom got evicted from their apartment. Family's been living in their car since January. Hard to focus on homework when you don't know where you're sleeping that night. The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on Broad Street. Jasmine could feel her players watching her, waiting to see how she'd respond to Tommy's implicit challenge. Coach, Marcus Thompson said quietly, maybe we could help them out. Work with them, show them some of our drills. This isn't a charity program, Jasmine said automatically, falling back on the hard line she'd drawn years ago. We're here to win championships and earn scholarships for players who've already proven they belong. But what if they could prove they belong too? Kevin Barnes spoke up, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd grown up in the same neighborhoods Tommy was describing. What if they just need a chance? Jasmine looked at her players, these kids she'd recruited, trained, and molded into champions, and saw something she'd never noticed before. They were hungry to give back, eager to extend a hand to kids who reminded them of their younger selves. It's not that simple, she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Actually, Tommy said quietly, it is that simple. You bring them in for a workout. If they can't keep up with your players, they are gone. If they cause problems, they are gone. If they don't meet your academic standards, they are gone. But if they can prove they belong, then what? Jasmine challenged. Then I risk everything I've built on kids with police records and unstable living situations. Then I jeopardize my players' futures for some feel-good story about second chances. Then you do what you've always done, Tommy said with quiet intensity. You take kids who everybody else has written off and show them they are worth more than their circumstances. The words hit home because they were true. Every player on her roster had come from difficult backgrounds. Damon's father was serving time for armed robbery. Marcus had been in foster care since he was 13. Kevin had watched his older brother die in a drive-by shooting when he was 14. That's different, Jasmine said, but even she could hear how weak the argument sounded. How? Because I recruited those players. I chose them. I knew what I was getting into. You chose them, Tommy agreed. But you chose them because someone else saw potential in you once. Someone took a chance on a little girl from the community center who had big dreams and no money to make them come true. Jasmine felt her breath catch. She'd never told anyone about Mrs. Patterson, her middle school basketball coach in Atlanta who'd driven to Jasmine's apartment at midnight to check on her when she missed practice. Who'd bought her first pair of proper basketball shoes with her own money. Who'd filled out Jasmine's high school transfer paperwork when her family moved again. How did you? Because I know you, Tommy said simply. I've always known you. You can pretend you're this hard-ass coach who only cares about winning, but I know you lie awake at night thinking about the kids who didn't make it. The ones who had talent and dreams but never got the chance to prove it. Stop it. Jasmine's voice was barely above a whisper. I know you keep newspaper clippings about players who've succeeded at other schools, wondering if you could have helped them if they'd found their way to you instead. I said stop it. I know you volunteer at youth camps on weekends and pay for equipment out of your own salary because you remember what it felt like to want something so badly and not have the resources to chase it. Stop it. The words exploded out of her with such force that they echoed through the gymnasium like gunshots. Tommy stopped talking, but his eyes never left her face. Around them, her players stood frozen, not sure whether to intervene or disappear. You don't know anything, Jasmine said, her voice shaking with 20 years of buried emotion. You don't know what it's like to build something from nothing. You don't know what it's like to have 17 kids depending on you to be perfect all the time. You don't know what it's like to make decisions that affect other people's futures. You're right, Tommy said quietly. I don't know what that's like. But I know what it's like to be one of those kids everyone gives up on. I know what it's like to have talent and dreams and no one willing to take a chance on you. So this is about you. Jasmine latched onto the accusation like a lifeline. This whole thing is just about you trying to prove something to yourself. Maybe it started that way, Tommy admitted. But it's not about me anymore. It's about DeMarco and Malik and Jamal. It's about giving them the same chance you got. The same chance your players got. My players earned their spots. So can they. The silence that followed was thick with tension and possibility. Jasmine could feel herself standing at a crossroads, could sense that whatever decision she made in the next few minutes would change everything. Coach, Damon said quietly, what if we just took a look at them? Just a workout, nothing official. Yeah, Marcus agreed. If they are not good enough, we'll know in 10 minutes. And if they are good enough? Jasmine asked. The question hung in the air unanswered because everyone in the gymnasium knew what it meant. If Tommy's kids were good enough, it would mean taking risks. It would mean opening her program to unknowns. It would mean trusting someone who'd already broken her heart once. There's something else, Tommy said, his voice careful. Something I should have told you earlier. Jasmine braced herself for another revelation, another piece of information that would complicate an already impossible situation. Malik Washington, Tommy continued. He's not just any Washington. He's your cousin Regina's boy. The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Regina Washington, her stepfather's niece, who'd gotten pregnant at 16 and disappeared from family gatherings shortly after. Jasmine had always wondered what happened to Regina's baby, had thought about him sometimes during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. How do you? He told me about his family. About an aunt who played professional basketball, who became a coach. When he described her, I knew it had to be you. Jasmine felt the walls she'd spent 20 years building begin to crumble in earnest. Malik was family. Blood. The child of a girl who'd been written off by everyone except Jasmine's stepfather, who'd always believed in second chances. Where is he now? She asked, her voice barely audible. Probably shooting baskets in the dark behind the community center, pretending he's not worried about where his grandmother is going to find money for rent this month. The image hit her like a punch to the gut. How many nights had she spent doing the same thing? Shooting baskets by streetlight, using the rhythm of the ball to quiet the voices in her head that whispered she wasn't good enough, smart enough, strong enough to make it out. Bring them tomorrow, she said before she could talk herself out of it. What? Tommy's eyes widened in surprise. Bring them tomorrow. Saturday morning, 8 a.m. One workout. If they can't keep up, they're gone. If they cause problems, they're gone. If they don't meet my standards academically or behaviorally, they're gone. And if they do meet your standards? Jasmine looked around the gymnasium, at the championship banners hanging from the rafters, at the gleaming trophies in the display case, at the faces of her players who trusted her to make decisions that would affect their futures. Then we'll see, she said finally. Tommy's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since he walked into her gym. It was the same smile he'd worn as a 9-year-old boy teaching an 8-year-old girl how to shoot free throws, and it made her heart do things she'd forgotten hearts could do. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me yet, Jasmine warned. I haven't gone soft. My standards haven't changed. If your boys want to be part of this program, they'll have to earn it just like everybody else. I wouldn't expect anything less. As Tommy headed for the exit, Jasmine called after him one more time. Tommy. He turned, eyebrows raised. Don't make me regret this. I won't, he promised. I won't let you down again. After he left, Jasmine stood alone with her players in the middle of the court. The gymnasium felt different somehow, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Coach, Damon said quietly, you okay? Jasmine looked at these kids who'd followed her into battle after battle, who trusted her to lead them toward futures they'd only dreamed about. They deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as she could give them. That man, she said carefully, is someone I knew a long time ago. Someone who was important to me. How important? Marcus asked with the bluntness of 17-year-old curiosity. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, searching for words that could explain 20 years of longing and loss and the terrifying possibility of second chances. Important enough to change everything, she said finally. Later that night, Jasmine sat in her apartment, a modest 2-bedroom place she'd bought with her first coaching salary, staring at her phone. She'd pulled up Tommy's contact information, which he'd insisted on giving her before he left, and had been staring at his number for the better part of an hour. Her apartment reflected her personality, clean, organized, functional. Trophies and team photos lined the shelves, but there were no personal mementos, no pictures of family or friends. She'd learned long ago that the past was dangerous territory, full of landmines that could explode without warning. But tonight, for the first time in years, she found herself thinking about what might have been. What would have happened if Tommy's letters had found her? What would have happened if they'd grown up together, navigated adolescence and young adulthood side by side? Would she still have become the woman she was now, driven, successful, but fundamentally alone? Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant coach asking about tomorrow's practice schedule. Jasmine typed back a response, then set the phone aside and walked to her bedroom window. From here, she could see the lights of downtown Richmond, the city that had shaped her and broken her and ultimately given her a place to build something meaningful. Somewhere out there, Tommy was probably lying awake too, wondering if he'd made the right choice in coming back into her life. Somewhere out there, 3 kids were probably shooting baskets by streetlight, dreaming of futures that seemed as distant as the stars. And somewhere in between all of that was the possibility that tomorrow might change everything. Do you think Jasmine made the right decision to give Tommy's players a chance? Have you ever had to choose between protecting what you've built and taking a risk on something unknown? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made basketball feel like a sacrament. Jasmine stood in the center of Richmond High's gymnasium at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the appointed time, watching her breath form small clouds in the still cool air. The custodial staff had cranked up the heat, but it would take another hour for the building to fully warm up. She'd been awake since 4 a.m., lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, second-guessing every decision that had led to this moment. In the harsh light of morning, her choice to give Tommy's players a chance seemed less like compassion and more like professional suicide. But she was here, wearing her lucky red tracksuit and carrying a clipboard with 3 blank evaluation forms. Whatever happened in the next 2 hours would determine not just the fate of 3 kids she'd never met, but possibly the trajectory of the program she'd spent 3 years building. The gym doors opened at exactly 7:50 a.m., and Tommy walked in followed by 3 young men who moved with the unconscious grace of natural athletes. Jasmine felt her breath catch as she got her first look at the kids Tommy had described with such passionate conviction. DeMarco Johnson was everything Tommy had promised, 6'4" with the lean build of a gazelle and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the gymnasium in a single sweep. He carried himself with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to show too much enthusiasm for fear of having it crushed. Malik Washington was smaller, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of a general surveying a battlefield. When his eyes met Jasmine's, she saw the unmistakable Washington family stubborn streak that had driven her stepfather to success and her cousin Regina to heartbreak. Jamal Rivers was the tallest of the three, 6'8", with shoulders that spoke of manual labor and hands that looked like they'd been designed specifically to handle a basketball. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Old eyes in a young face, the kind that came from carrying responsibilities no teenager should have to bear. "Morning, Coach," Tommy said, his voice carefully neutral. "These are my boys." "Good morning," Jasmine replied, falling back on professional courtesy to mask her nervousness. "Gentlemen, welcome to Richmond High. I'm Coach Washington." "Yes, the three said in near unison, their voices carrying the respectful cadence of kids who'd been raised right despite difficult circumstances. "Before we start," Jasmine continued, consulting her clipboard, "I need to understand what you think you're doing here. This isn't a recreational league. This isn't community service. This is a championship program with academic and behavioral standards that some Division I colleges would envy. Are you here to play games, or are you here to work?" "Work," DeMarco said immediately. "Always work," Malik added. "Whatever it takes," Jamal finished. Their responses came without hesitation, and Jasmine felt the first small crack in her professional skepticism. These kids understood the gravity of the moment. "Good," she said. "Then let's see what you can do." What happened next was 4 to 5 minutes of basketball that redefined Jasmine's understanding of raw talent. She'd put together a series of drills designed to break players down, conditioning exercises that would expose any lack of fitness, ball handling challenges that would reveal technical weaknesses, scrimmage situations that would test basketball IQ under pressure. Tommy's boys didn't just pass her tests, they shattered them. DeMarco moved like poetry in motion, his ball handling so smooth it seemed choreographed. When Jasmine threw a no-look pass at his head to test his reflexes, he caught it one-handed and immediately transitioned into a crossover move that left her best defender stumbling. Malik read the court like he had ESPN highlights playing in his head, exactly as Tommy had described. During a 3-on-3 scrimmage, he threw passes to spots where players weren't yet standing, trusting they'd be there by the time the ball arrived. They always were. But it was Jamal who truly took her breath away. The kid moved with a fluidity that defied his size, posting up like a veteran and stepping out to hit three-pointers with the casual confidence of someone who'd never met a shot he couldn't make. "Jesus," Damon Peterson whispered during a water break, watching Jamal sink his 7th consecutive free throw. "Where did you find this kid?" "Same place you found your talent," Tommy replied quietly. "In circumstances that should have broken him but didn't." As the workout progressed, Jasmine found herself forgetting about risk assessments and academic transcripts. She was watching something she'd only seen a handful of times in her coaching career, the perfect intersection of natural ability and desperate hunger that created truly special players. But it wasn't their talent that ultimately convinced her. It was a moment that happened during the final scrimmage, when Marcus Thompson went down hard after a collision with Jamal Rivers. The gymnasium went silent as Marcus lay on the floor, clutching his ankle and fighting back tears. It was the kind of injury that could end a season, derail a scholarship, destroy a future that had seemed so bright just moments before. Without hesitation, Jamal dropped to his knees beside Marcus, his face etched with genuine concern. "You all right, man? That was my fault. I should have pulled up." "Nah," Marcus grimaced through the pain. "Clean play. Just landed wrong. Here." Jamal gently helped Marcus to a sitting position, supporting his weight with surprising gentleness. "Lean on me. We'll get you to the bench." As they made their way slowly across the court, Jasmine heard Jamal speaking quietly to Marcus about his own experiences with ankle injuries, offering encouragement and practical advice about recovery. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress the watching coaches. Just one athlete caring for another. That was the moment Jasmine knew these kids belonged in her program. After Marcus was helped to the training room by the team's athletic trainer, who diagnosed a mild sprain that would sideline him for a week, Jasmine called the workout to an end. "Gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gymnasium, "thank you for coming today. You'll hear from me by Monday morning regarding our decision." The polite dismissal was what she'd planned to say, the professional boundary she'd intended to maintain. But as she watched Tommy's face fall, as she saw the hope drain from the eyes of 3 kids who'd given everything they had for 4 to 5 minutes, she realized she couldn't maintain that distance. Not anymore. "DeMarco," she called, stopping the young man as he headed for the exit. He turned, wariness replacing the exhaustion on his face. "Yes, Your ball handling is exceptional, but you telegraph your moves when you're tired. Work on keeping your head up during the 4th quarter." A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, I will." "Malik." She turned to the point guard. "Your court vision is outstanding, but you need to be more vocal. A quarterback is only as good as his ability to communicate with his team." "I can do that, coach." "And Jamal?" She looked at the big man who'd shown such gentleness with Marcus. "You have professional-level talent, but you play like you're afraid of taking up space. Stop apologizing for being good." Jamal's eyes widened. "You really think I'm good?" "I think you're better than good," Jasmine said simply. "I think you could play any way you want to play, if you're willing to put in the work." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. These weren't the words of a coach planning to reject players. These were the words of someone investing in futures. "Does this mean?" DeMarco started to ask. "This means you're Richmond High Rams now," Jasmine said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Practice starts Monday at 6 a.m. Don't be late." The explosion of joy that followed, 3 young men celebrating like they'd just won the lottery, Tommy's face breaking into a grin that lit up the entire gymnasium, her own players cheering and welcoming their new teammates, was the kind of moment that reminded Jasmine why she'd fallen in love with coaching in the first place. But even in the midst of celebration, she found herself looking at Tommy, seeing the gratitude and something deeper in his eyes that made her heart do complicated things. 2 hours later, after the players had left and the gymnasium had returned to its usual Saturday afternoon quiet, Jasmine and Tommy stood alone on the court where everything had changed. "Thank you," Tommy said simply. "I know what this cost you." "Do you?" Jasmine asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "You're risking everything you've built on 3 kids with complicated histories. You're opening your program to unknowns because I asked you to. Because of what we used to mean to each other." Jasmine shook her head. "I'm not doing this because of what we used to mean to each other." Tommy's face fell slightly. "No. I'm doing this because of what those kids could mean to their futures. Because of what Malik means to his grandmother, what Jamal means to his family, what DeMarco means to a community that's written him off." She paused, studying his face. "But mostly, I'm doing this because of what you mean to me now." Now. The man who spent his weekends coaching kids for free. The man who knew these players better than they knew themselves. The man who was willing to have his heart broken all over again for the chance to help them succeed. Jasmine felt her voice growing softer. "That man is worth taking a risk on." Tommy took a step closer to her, hope flickering in his blue eyes. "Does that mean you forgive me? For leaving, for not trying harder to find you?" "Tommy," Jasmine said gently, "we were children. We made children's promises and lived children's disappointments. But we're not children anymore." "No," he agreed. "We're not. So the question isn't whether I forgive the 9-year-old boy who couldn't keep his promise. The question is whether I trust the man you've become. And do you?" Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, looking around the gymnasium that represented everything she'd accomplished on her own. The championship banners, the trophies, the photos of players who'd gone on to college success, all of it was proof that she didn't need anyone else to achieve her dreams. But standing here with Tommy, watching him light up as he talked about kids who reminded her of their younger selves, she realized that not needing someone wasn't the same as not wanting them. "I trust you with those boys," she said finally. "I trust you to help me coach them, to understand them in ways I might not be able to. I trust you to be the kind of man who puts their needs ahead of his own ego." And outside of basketball? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 20 years of what ifs and might-have-beens. "Outside of basketball," Jasmine said carefully, "I think we have a lot to figure out. We're not the same people we were when we were 8 and 9 years old. We've got baggage and scars and ways of protecting ourselves that might not be easy to navigate. But you're willing to try." "I'm willing to try." Tommy's smile was radiant. "That's all I've wanted for 20 years. Just the chance to try." He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. When she didn't, when she let their fingers intertwine for the first time since they were children, It felt like coming home and starting over all at the same time. "There's something else," Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" "I never stopped looking for you either. Not actively, not like you did. But every time I heard your name, Tommy or Thomas, I'd turn around hoping it was you. Every time I saw someone with sandy brown hair and blue eyes, my heart would skip a beat. Every time I coached a player who reminded me of the boy who taught me to dream, I'd wonder what happened to him." Tommy squeezed her hand gently. "We found each other." "We found each other," she agreed. The Richmond Times-Dispatch sports section featured a photo of Jasmine Washington standing next to the Virginia State Championship trophy, surrounded by her players. The headline read, "Rams complete Cinderella run with title victory." But it wasn't the trophy that caught readers' attention. It was the smaller story in the bottom corner of the page. Local coach partners with community center to launch youth development program. The program, a joint venture between Richmond High and the Riverside Community Center, provided academic tutoring, basketball training, and mentorship to at-risk youth throughout the city. It was funded partly by the school district and partly by private donations from people who believed in second chances. Tommy Mitchell was listed as the program's director. Jasmine Washington was listed as its head coach. In the 6 months since DeMarco, Malik, and Jamal had joined the Richmond High basketball team, all three had transformed not just as players but as young men. DeMarco had earned a full scholarship to Virginia Commonwealth University and was planning to study social work. Malik had been accepted to Duke University with a full ride and intended to major in business administration. Jamal had received offers from 12 Division I schools and was still weighing his options. But perhaps more importantly, all three had become mentors themselves, working with younger kids at the community center and showing them that circumstances didn't have to determine destiny. On this particular Saturday morning in April, as spring painted Richmond in shades of green and possibility, Jasmine and Tommy stood on the outdoor court behind the Riverside Community Center, watching their latest group of kids run through drills. "You think they are ready for high school tryouts next year?" Tommy asked, nodding toward a particularly talented 13-year-old who reminded them both of themselves at that age. "The question isn't whether they are ready," Jasmine replied, unconsciously echoing something she'd learned long ago. "The question is whether we've prepared them to be ready." Tommy smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her words. "And have we?" Jasmine watched as the 13-year-old made a pass that would have impressed college coaches, watched as his teammates celebrated the assist with genuine joy, watched as kids who'd started the program angry and hopeless now moved with the confidence of young people who believed in their own futures. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think we have." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the court, Jasmine felt Tommy's hand slip into hers. It was a gesture that had become natural over the past 6 months, as natural as breathing or dribbling a basketball. They'd taken things slowly, rebuilding trust and learning to love each other as adults rather than as the children they'd once been. There had been difficult conversations about the past, honest discussions about their fears and hopes for the future, and moments of joy that reminded them both why they'd fallen in love in the first place. "Jazz," Tommy said quietly, using the nickname she'd finally given him permission to use again. "Yeah. I have something to ask you." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. There was nervousness there, and excitement, and the kind of hope that came from believing in impossible things. "What is it?" Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Jasmine's heart stop beating for a moment. "I know we've only been back in each other's lives for 6 months, he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know we're still figuring things out, still learning how to be Tommy and Jazz instead of 2 broken kids who lost each other. But I also know that I've loved you for 20 years, and I want to love you for 20 more." He dropped to one knee right there on the cracked asphalt of the community center court, in the same place where they'd first met as children. "Jasmine Washington," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "will you marry me?" The ring was simple but perfect, a solitaire diamond that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in tiny rainbows. But it wasn't the ring that made Jasmine's eyes fill with tears. It was the realization that some promises were worth waiting a lifetime to keep. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As Tommy slipped the ring onto her finger, the kids on the court began to cheer. They'd known this moment was coming before either Jasmine or Tommy had fully admitted it to themselves. Later, as they walked hand in hand toward Tommy's car, he'd finally traded in the Honda for a reliable sedan that wouldn't embarrass him in the school parking lot. Jasmine thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 20 years ago, two children had made promises they were too young to keep. They'd loved with the fierce intensity of the innocent and lost each other to circumstances beyond their control. They'd grown up separately, shaped by different disappointments and different dreams, becoming people who might never have found each other again under normal circumstances. But basketball had brought them back together. Basketball and the shared belief that every kid deserved someone who would fight for their dreams. "I love you, Tommy Mitchell," Jasmine said as they reached the car. "I love you too, Jas Washington," he replied, then corrected himself with a grin, soon to be Jas Mitchell. "Oh, we're going to have to talk about that," Jasmine laughed. "Coach Washington has a nice ring to it." "Whatever makes you happy," Tommy said, opening her car door with the chivalry his grandmother had drilled into him decades ago. "I've got the rest of my life to figure out how to make you happy." As they drove through the streets of Richmond toward a future neither of them had dared to imagine 6 months ago, Jasmine realized that some stories didn't end with childhood. Some stories were just beginning. The basketball coach who had rejected the player had become the woman who chose to love the man he'd become. The childhood sweethearts who'd lost each other had found their way back through the game that had brought them together in the first place. And in a gym somewhere in Richmond, Virginia, 3 young men who'd been written off by the world were preparing for college careers that would take them places they'd never dreamed possible, carrying with them the lesson that sometimes the most beautiful victories come from the willingness to take a chance on someone else's dreams. It was, Jasmine thought as she looked at the ring sparkling on her finger, exactly the kind of ending her 8-year-old self would have believed in. The kind that proved fairy tales could come true, even when they took 20 years and a lot of heartbreak to get there. What did you think of Tommy and Jasmine's journey back to each other? Have you ever had a love story that came full circle in unexpected ways? I'd love to hear about your own experiences with second chances and childhood connections in the comments below. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just new beginnings in disguise.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.